So it's my early 20s, and I'm a photographer with the York Dispatch, and a call comes over the scanner that a man was in a cherry picker, and he was power washing a window, and he was struck by lightning. So myself and a reporter get sent to the scene, and we get there, and it's a packed house. There's a lot of people there, and the police are keeping us back about a block away, but you can see the cherry picker is still up in the air, and there's smoke just billowing out of it. So there's a corner store that's right in the corner where we're standing, and so I go inside and I talk my way up into the second floor balcony to where I get a better view of what's going on, and I'm standing there, and as they're bringing the cherry picker down, they realize that he is still alive. And this goes from a recovery to a rescue. So they quickly get him out of the cherry picker, and they start bringing him down the street, and they're bringing him right underneath to where I'm standing. So there's an old saying in photography that if you see the photo in your camera, you don't have the photo. So I hold the shutter down, and I'm hitting it as fast as I can as they're kind of making their way underneath me. And although I cannot see what's happening underneath me, I can smell his skin as they're coming down. And although I can't see as they are working underneath me, I can hear his screams and his moans as they are taking him to the ambulance. And it wasn't until I got back to the newsroom and processed my photos that I actually got to see what was happening underneath me. His clothes had been blown off of his body. His skin was a combination of just burned and melted. His face was frozen in the screams that I could still hear in my head. As you can imagine, I had a hard time processing this. I was the youngest person in the newsroom, and I didn't know how to handle a situation like this. So I did the only thing that I knew to do. I went to my next assignment. And in the weeks that followed, when this guy fought for his life and then died, and I didn't know what to do with those emotions, I went to my next assignment. And over the next months and years and decade that I covered trauma after trauma, whether it's a fire that destroyed the home of a family, school shootings, or the beating of a 2-year-old girl by her mother's boyfriend while the mother stood there and watched, I went to my next assignment. But to be fair, I never asked the question of what to do with this. But Scott Blanchard did. Scott Blanchard was an editor of the York Daily Record, and Scott Blanchard had 2 questions. 1, what if we taught journalists how to cover trauma and to understand trauma? And 2, what if we set up a program of peer support for journalists or anyone in a newsroom who suffers to the traumas that they cover or hear about? And I so wanted to be Scott's wingman on this, because I thought to myself, I want to be a part of this. The problem is there is literally not one newsroom in the entire United States that had this kind of program. Nothing. The closest we found was in Australia. But the closest program, non-journalism, that we found was right here in York County. The York County Critical Incident Stress Management Team. They are stress relief for emergency workers, police officers, firefighters, EMS. So we reached out to them and we were like, look, we really want to do a program and we were kind of curious about how you do this. Can we come? And they're like, sure. So Scott and I are sitting there in a room of about 20 EMS workers, 20 police officers, 20 firefighters, and we're all like kind of sitting in a circle. And half of them, I'm sure half of them didn't want us there. So they ask us, why are you here? So Scott stands up and kind of lays out what our plans are, what our goals are, what our dreams are for trying to make this program for journalists or people in newsrooms who go through this. And then they ask me to stand up and say why I'm there. I stand up and I share the story from 15 years earlier of a man who was struck by lightning and whose screams I can still hear and whose flesh I can still smell. And I've never known what to do with that. Next thing I know, there's a woman who's sitting in a chair who stands up and comes within like 2 or 3 feet of me and says, "That was my brother." And then she hugs me. And you could feel the oxygen just leave the room. And finally, after 15 years, a senseless death made a little sense to me. To use this to help in the upcoming days and weeks and months and years. Scott and I teamed up with CISM and the Dart Center from Columbia University and tried to create this program and to bring it into every newsroom in our chain, one of the largest chains in the world, to try to give journalists this gift, this opportunity to process, to learn. And it became a life's mission. Why? Because journalism at that time was my life. And the people there, my coworkers in the newsroom, they were my family. And that newsroom, that was my home. And trust me, when I tell you this, growing up in a newsroom, there is no place like it. Thank you.